Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining this important conversation. We're going to be starting in just a moment. Welcome to our State of Citizen Safety and Victim Rights Telephone Town Hall. Our conversation is presented by Representative Jenny Graham's campaign committee and is not an official function of the Washington State Legislature. If you would like to ask a question, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and we'll do our best to add you to the conversation. Again, if you have a question for Representative Graham, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and we'll get you in the queue to start to ask that question. We're going to get started in just a moment here. We're just waiting for some additional folks to join the call. And welcome to our State of Citizen Safety and Victim Rights Telephone Town Hall. Our conversation is presented by Representative Jenny Graham's campaign committee. And if you'd like to ask Representative Graham a question, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and we'll do our best to add you to the conversation. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're just waiting a few more minutes for folks to join. And again, if you're just joining us, I'd like to welcome you to our State of Citizen Safety and Victim Rights Telephone Town Hall. Our conversation is presented by Representative Jenny Graham's campaign committee, and it's not an official function of the Washington State Legislature. If you'd like to ask a question, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and we'll do our best to add you to the conversation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Representative Jenny Graham. Representative?
Thank you, Sean, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I've been serving as your 6th District advocate since 2018. I am the ranking member on the House Community Safety Committee. In addition, I serve on the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, Post-Secondary and Workforce Development, Military and Veterans Affairs Committee, and I was recently appointed to the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. Now I'm going to move on to the theme of this town hall. Like many of us, I watched the sentencing of Bryan Kohberger, the killer who ended 4 young lives in Idaho. I related to the families of the victims in an all too personal way. My little sister and 2 other victims that I knew were hunted for sport and murdered for the sick personal entertainment of the Green River serial killer. As I watched the recent sentencing, I worked through a whole range of emotions while I identified the major miscarriage of justice that I recognize from personal experience. Life without the possibility of parole doesn't mean that anymore for a growing number of human predators across the nation. There is no truth in sentencing anymore to extend mercy to the loved ones of homicide victims. That needs to change. I am grateful for this time as we join together to talk about the dangerous laws, proposals, and rule changes that are increasingly favoring predators over crime victims, their loved ones, and the safety of the broader community. Case in point, Washington State ranks in the bottom, and according to some reports, we are dead last for police officers per capita and in funding our court systems. Article 4 of our state constitution articulates that the judiciary is a separate branch of government which must be adequately funded by the state to serve the people. Former Judge Brian Tollefson, in a message to the Washington State Bar Association, wrote, "In many ways, courts are less well funded than the other 2 branches of state government, and comparisons usually demonstrate that Washington State is near the bottom of the list for support of courts by a legislature." Judge Tollefson also wrote, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, Washington State ranked 50 out of 50 in the state funding for trial courts in 2012, and very little has changed. An old adage points out, show me your budget and I will show you your priorities. Currently, juvenile crime is skyrocketing across our state. Many of the growing number of homicides are youth victims and offenders. Ironically, Washington State passed the Becca Bill in 1995. The bill was an attempt to protect our youth from harm by enforcing truancy laws after 13-year-old Rebecca Hedman was murdered. She lived in Spokane, Washington with her parents. During the 2025 legislative session, it was a shock to see the governing party defund the supporting infrastructure for the Becca law by 71%, without meaningful and robust debate about the pros or cons of defunding a program to serve at-risk youth to keep them in school. This is a bad idea, and the program could be defunct as soon as December of this year. Our governor and governing majority party prioritized spending $1.3 billion with the B in funding for electric ferries and charging stations in Puget Sound, but gutted funding for at-risk children. Again, show me your budget, and that budget shows you the priorities. A Washington State mom is demanding justice. Tanika Tigner's daughter was brutally murdered by a criminal who was released from jail 8 years early. The murderer was serving time for previously mutilating his then-girlfriend with a knife as she slept. According to court records, the attack nearly killed his former girlfriend and caused her life-altering injuries. I'm going to repeat that. In Washington State, a mutilating murderer attacked his former girlfriend while she slept. Does that sound familiar? While released and under DOC community custody supervision for attempted murder, the violent human predator moved on to murder Tanika's daughter in a most heinous and cruel way. Washington state laws and our courts that prioritize violent criminal rights over the peace and safety of families and businesses, that's failing us. I have much more information concerning crime victims' rights, justice, and a balanced justice system, but right now I'm eager to focus on your questions and answers that you are seeking.
Thank you very much, Representative Graham. We have several questions that have come in. Robin in Spokane wants to know what life in prison really means in Washington State.
Robin, thank you for that question. There's life without the possibility of parole, and then life with parole. So life without the possibility of parole does not mean what it says anymore for the cold-blooded murderers. I can cite multiple cases in which those sentences were handed down appropriately and then changed at the whim of unaccountable individuals once the cameras stopped covering the cases. Mass murderer Timothy Pauley is just one example of no truth in sentencing in action. The ISRB board not only voted to grant the unrepentant murderer parole, but he was going to be able to live in the same community as the victims he created directly and indirectly. I attended the parole hearing by invitation of the victims' families' request. This is a life sentence for the victims and their loved ones. The crime victims were told life without parole, only now to be dragged back into the parole or clemency proceedings every time the criminal requests or is granted a hearing to be released. The victims and or their loved ones are not provided legal representation. The victim's advocates aren't hired by the victim, and it's the victims that have the deck stacked against them to keep the violent murderer incarcerated. It's a bait and switch that is beyond cruel. Life with parole is roughly a 20-year sentence that ends up being about 13 and a half years with good time served upon eligibility of parole or release. I experienced that in painful reality as many of us questioned why RBD Williams was possibly going to be released back into our Spokane community after serving only 13 and a half years for the kidnapping, rape, murder, and dumping of 15-year-old Linda Strait. 13 and a half years. Think about that. This was after Williams served time for the kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder of 2 8-year-old little girls in Spokane. I'm asking, how many times does a vicious and deadly predator get to affect, destroy, or end people's lives before society has the right to demand that they are permanently prevented from doing that again and again and again?
Thank you, Representative Graham. I just want to take a moment to remind folks on the line, if you have a question for Representative Graham, you can press 0 on your telephone keypad, and we're going to get to as many questions as we can this evening. Right now, we'll go to our next question, which is from Robert in Airway Heights. Robert wants to know why our state doesn't pay for justice, especially prosecution.
Thank you, Robert.
Yep.
Thank you, Robert, for the question regarding why our state doesn't pay for justice, especially prosecution. Boy, there's a lot of information that we need to cover. We're not going to get it all tonight, but I will lead with this. We are one of 5 states in our nation that the state doesn't pay for our justice system. According to a Spokane County commissioner, while the state does pay for some services, our counties and municipalities must cover the costs for much of our judicial systems. Unfunded mandates combined with more and more expectations are going to culminate in a collapse of systems that cannot keep up without the needed resources to comply. It's totally fair and reasonable to scrutinize the state budget line items. Our governor and governing party in the legislature can find or create billions of dollars to pay for electric ferry systems and supporting expensive one-sided programs for criminals, but not fund vital youth at-risk programs that foster early intervention to keep our kids engaged in learning. Prioritizing the wrong choices is destroying our corrections and judicial systems. Not enforcing our laws and funding other pet projects is sending a clear message to bad actors that crime is acceptable and it pays. I'm currently working on public policy to prioritize these issues and more based on community conversations just like this one. I'm really looking forward to working with whomever is willing to put politics aside and find common sense policy changes.
Thank you very much, Representative Graham. We're going to go to our next caller in just a moment, but if you have a question for Representative Graham, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and we'll get you in line to ask your question as soon as possible. Okay, our next question comes to us from Larry. Larry, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I applaud you for all the work that you're doing, but what will you do, Senator Graham, Representative Graham, to protect my family from having this happening to us? Thank you. What can you do for this? Thank you.
Larry, thank you so much for that thoughtful question. The most obvious thing that I'm going to point out is it's vitally important that we have more community conversations just like this that are focused on identifying what are the things that we're struggling with in this state, and also what are the solutions that are possibilities that, we can take a look at. The other thing is, in the time in which I have been elected, I have been on the Public Safety Committee and Civil Rights and Judiciary. There are a number of bills that I continually do introduce, whether they get a hearing or not, really doesn't matter at this point. These are good policy bills, and I'm hoping to continue fostering the conversation and connections with people on the other side of the aisle that have families just like we do, that want their families to be safe and prosper in this state. There are definitely good policies that we're introducing. One of the bills that I have is the Gavin Looper Act, which had to do with 13-year-old Gavin Looper, who was tragically shot and killed in a drive-by shooting in Spokane. I've had the honor of getting to know his mom a little bit more and name this legislation after Gavin. And really what it does is it very much draws a line in the sand and says, if you are going to commit a violent crime with a firearm, you quite simply are not getting out early, period. Because we have to mean it when we say that if you're going to commit crimes that are going to hurt or kill our loved ones, we're going to take it seriously, and they are going to pay a stiff price for doing it.
Okay, thank you very much, Representative Graham, and thank you very much, Larry, for your question. Our next question comes to us from John. John asks, I heard that our state Supreme Court wants local judges to dismiss first-time offenders. Is that true?
Thank you, John. And sadly, I'm glad everybody is sitting down. I was recently appointed to the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, which is appropriate with me being the ranking member for the Community Safety Committee. The very first meeting that I attended, the topic of that meeting was what is possible when it comes to violent felony crimes, including drive-by shootings, to allow first-time offender waivers. Now that is absolutely, should be a non-starter and should cause, a pause when we're talking about first-time waivers for first-time offenders. That was meant to be non-violent crimes, and I'll say that I definitely am taking issue with what is being counted as non-violent crimes these days. That's something that we need to visit. Now, I think most people would agree that if we have somebody that's a young person, that yes, we want to intervene early. We do want to turn that behavior around. However, we also have to look at the other side of that same coin and recognize that with the skyrocketing juvenile crime, including murder, that we have going on, there are bad actors that are preying on kids to get them to commit these crimes, knowing that they're not going to serve the sentence that an adult would. That's definitely not fair to the crime victims that are the ones that are always left holding the bag. But, it's not fair to the kids whose lives are destroyed before they ever get started, and the adult that put them up to doing this faces no punishment at all, or they get a slap on the hand. My priority is that I would love to see in Spokane and Washington State that the bad actors that are deciding to prey on our families for whatever reason start to get the message that Washington State and Spokane is not the place that you want to do this. We are going to prioritize protecting our families, and if they commit these crimes, we are going to throw the book at them. And that also sends a message out to people in other states that are thinking about coming here and committing crimes here. That messaging is really important. And just like so many other things, if you say something and you don't follow it up with action, then what difference does it make? They don't believe it, and this is part of why we're dealing what we're dealing with in the state.
Thank you, Representative Graham, and thank you, John, for that thoughtful question. I'd like to remind everybody, if you have a question for Representative Graham, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and we'll do our best to get to your question. Our next question comes to us from Mary. Mary asks, can you tell me more about why the BECA bill was defunded?
Mary, thank you for caring about our at-risk children. Again, this was very much a shock. This came really out of nowhere. We had very little time to try to fight this. And, again, we're in our state, we do not have a taxing problem. We have a spending and priorities problem. When an individual, and we've had this happening, we have had people that have been reaching out to us as representatives that thankfully are taking the time, everyday people taking the time to look at this budget line by line to see where the money is going. And I highly encourage, good people to do exactly that. It's your money. And you need to have a say in where that's being spent. And, it is a dirty, rotten shame that the BECA bill, which, is meant to help our kids, keep them from harm, wasn't important enough to make sure that that was a priority. I'm hoping, with maybe feedback from, the good people in Washington State that contact state representatives, maybe that's something that we can rethink. I've had an opportunity to talk with a judge that is, for all intents and purposes, a pretty strong expert in the issue, and that's helpful because I'm not a judge, I'm not a prosecutor, so I rely on the people that are the ones that are having to try to navigate this to let me know how legislation or the defunding of legislation or the funding of the infrastructure that they need to be able to comply, how this affects them. So thank you again for that question. It's sad that we're here, but it's a reality, and this is the reason why I'm doing more town halls just like this.
Hey, thank you very much, Representative Graham, and thanks again for that question, Mary. Again, if you'd like to ask Representative Graham a question, please press 0 on your telephone keypad. Okay, our next question comes to us from Jerry. Jerry asks, I live on the South Hill. There was a drive-by shooting in my neighborhood in the last couple of days. What are you going to do about it?
Well, Jerry, thank you. And I was your state representative, more than likely before the redistricting change, and it's been an honor to serve the people in the South Hill for as long as I did before that redistricting change. Just because we've had a boundary change, though, doesn't mean that my care about what happens to your family in, the other districts doesn't matter. Crime doesn't care what political party you belong to or you don't. It doesn't care how much money you have, where you come from, what your gender is. It's an equal opportunity destroyer for both sides of the equation. And, when it comes to the drive-by shootings, again, this is happening, number one, because the message has gone out loud and clear that you can commit these crimes and it's going to be tolerated. We cannot continue to, how often do we hear on the news about gun violence and the outrage and, the demand to do something about it? Well, I will argue that where that begins is if we're serious about this, and I'm serious about this, it starts with recognizing the people violence that is combined with whatever tool somebody uses to harm or kill somebody else, that we have to start recognizing and treating it as as the absolute emergency that it is. These are situations in which somebody's life can be easily taken. And, there's another aspect of this that I think a lot of people really hadn't thought about. And I know I didn't. I ended up coming across this by accident. But if somebody's not injured or killed in one of these drive-by shootings, there's bullets or something that go through the house, it's property damage. I'm sorry, I look at that as attempted murder, not property damage, and that's what I'm saying. It's not being treated for the extreme crime that it is, and I will tell you without fail, and with my promise to continue to be an unapologetic, tenacious advocate that refuses to be quiet when it comes to doing what we need to do to turn things around and find a balance in our justice system where we help the people that we can help, but we also hold people accountable that are the can'ts and the won'ts who won't change.
Thank you very much, Representative Graham, and thanks for that question, Jerry. Again, if you'd like to ask Representative Graham a question, could you please press 0 on your telephone keypad? Jenny, do you have any other remarks you'd like to share or updates on legislation?
Well, yeah, there's some. So as far as updates, the phase we're in right now is we're in what they call the interim. So this is where I have an opportunity to look at, bills that we have looked at in the past, things that maybe didn't pass last session but are likely to come back up again. It's also an opportunity to do casework where some of the other really good bills that I've had an opportunity to work on are, requests from constituents, say somebody that has a problem with the diabetes sensor. Sometimes there's problems with those and they've had a hard time getting them replaced quickly. So there was legislation that I worked on with that, which I'll bring back again. Another one came to me from a pharmacist that pointed out the amount of medicine that they have to destroy because of an expiration time frame, where some of this can be cancer very expensive medicine that is having to be destroyed. So I am working again across the aisle to see what we can do to change this. If this medicine is already paid for and somebody that either doesn't have insurance or doesn't have enough insurance can benefit from this medication, we should be doing everything we can do to get it to them. And that is something that I am enjoying working on. There's other legislation that I'm currently working on concerning truth in sentencing laws. There are some other states that have those laws, so I'm currently looking at that, trying to see if there's something that we can do to make it work for Washington State, because especially in these really cold-blooded, heinous, aggravated first-degree murder cases, if that sentence, if they're already getting a plea deal, right, and they're already having things taken off, and they get a life without parole sentence, that is exactly what that should mean. And I think that the crime victims' families deserve, that certainty in their life, so that you'll never hear me say closure ever. I will always say resolution, because for us there is no closure. It's a life sentence for us. Every holiday, every memory that comes up. Sometimes it's dreams or nightmares. We live that every single day. And I take pride in knowing that I'm doing everything that I can do to stop a detective from having to go to somebody else's door and notify that family that they're never going to see their loved one again. I just don't want to see that happen. And again, I'm looking at that as being something that should be unifying us as a people and human beings for Spokane and our state to thrive and prosper. And, that's where my heart is. That's where my goals are. And it is an absolute honor to have the ability to advocate for you guys in Olympia, to bring your voices, your wants, wishes, needs, and most importantly, include you in the decisions that are being made that absolutely affect you at your doorsteps.
Thank you so much, Representative Graham. We also have another question from Judy. Judy wants to know, how can we support this cause? How can we support public safety?
Judy, thank you for that. One of the things that I'm starting to see that really gives me hope in a dark period of time that we're facing right now is I'm starting to see a coming together of, individuals that identify as Democrat, Republican, Independent, vote, don't vote, that what I highly recommend is looking to see locally some things that you can get involved in. I know that there's a group that is coming together in Spokane called SOS, Save Our Spokane. They're doing really good work. It's nonpartisan, rooted in common sense for safe and clean neighborhoods for everybody. So it's things like that I recommend. I'm also going to be doing some work in Olympia to bring not only crime victims, but people in general that want to see some change at the legislative level, to give them a chance to be heard. Oftentimes people over here they don't get a chance to be heard because of the fact we have to drive, we have a mountain, we have weather, you have lodging, you have food. But there is also remote testimony that we were able to work together on to get that passed. So now you can be somebody that has to work, or maybe you're disabled or you're elderly. You can still participate in watching what's going on with these committees, and not only watching, but you can sign up to testify. You can send written testimony. You can even weigh in real time, whether you support a certain bill that's up, that you either support it or you don't, and that's valuable feedback information for us. The other thing that I would also point out that you can do is gather, friends and family. Think about that, and think about some of the things that matter to you. What are the things that are keeping you up at night? And reach out to us and invite us, for possibly a forum, which isn't hard to put together, or even just coffee, with your neighbors. And those are things that I love to do. So with that in mind, really one of the things that I am working towards is being able to have what I call themed town halls, because this public safety issue is so big. It's just so big. So I think a better way to try to handle this is to break it down and come up with themes. Like one of the themes can be funding our court systems. And we can talk about legislation that has either been passed that's affected that in a good way or a bad way, and identify what that is, and then work for ways to try to correct it if it's not working. But the other thing we have the opportunity to do is bring in other professionals, such as our prosecutor or our county clerk or the sheriff or, the chief of police, or, really anybody else that, has some knowledge in these important issues. And, I look at this as an opportunity to share information. And what I'm really striving for are respectfully healthy, robust public conversations. That's what we're missing.
Thank you so much, Representative Graham. And Judy, thank you for that question. Thank you to everyone for sharing your input this evening and for your excellent questions. Unfortunately, we now are concluding our telephone town hall. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question, please visit votegraham.com. That's vote, GRAHAM.com, to email a comment and question, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Representative Graham is planning additional telephone town halls. And again, we want to thank everyone for joining and providing your valuable input. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.